Welcome to the Honest Hour. I'm your host, Luis Acevedo, and we got quite a bit to talk about today, and then we'll open up the floor with discussions. Unless somebody wants to jump in right away, that's the way we've been doing it lately and just cycling through the news articles. So, for any of the listeners after the show that are not watching this live, let me know how you guys feel about that. Uh, love your feedback. So before we jump into it, to give some people some time to jump in here, as I've already mentioned in our personal life, we found a car, so that's really cool. Now we just need to find another one. That way I can use it to do the stuff that I do. But the van is doing the job and doing well, so that's really nice. And was there anything else? No, I mean, that's about it. That's about it right now. Then I'll be going to the farm a little bit later. And yeah, but let's jump into the news for today. So I'm not sure if you guys have been paying attention to what's been going on in Europe. A lot of people seem to not be paying attention to it, and I don't know why, because it's not only fascinating, but I think um, foreshadowing what may be coming to America. So, for those of you that don't know, there's a lot of countries that have been rationing their gas, their hot water usage, their AC, all of these things. And this has to do with the sanctions against Russia. This has to do with mechanical breakdowns, etc. You4 are against Medicare for all, against it. So, yeah, the European nations like Germany, Spain, Italy, um, Norway, a bunch of them over there, the UK, are in horrible situations because of the sanctions and because of their climate change policies that are destroying their countries. For example, in Germany, they have the most searches ever for like firewood because in the wintertime, they're not going to be able to use the gas that they typically use. They're going to have to use firewood. So they're like going way back in the day, which I have nothing against. I think if you can, you should have a wood burning stove to help make yourself more sufficient. So I'm not against it, but the fact that their utilities are shutting down, their infrastructure shutting down is a sign of the times. And then you have their coal plants firing back up, and this totally contradicts their whole climate change agenda as it is. In addition to that, you have what's taking place in the UK where they're talking about don't pay UK, and they want millions of people, I think it's just 1 million people, to not pay their bills because they're going insane. And then I saw yesterday on Twitter that this Italian member said that this Italian citizen said that their bill, he showed their bill from 2000, I can't remember, 2021 or 2020 or 19, one of the two, where the bill was like $1,100, 1,100 euros. And then now it's reading like over 5,000 euros. Bro, Europe is completely okay. Jordan, I don't know what you're talking about. Nothing's wrong with Europe. What's your thoughts about portable gasoline generators being illegal? Where are they illegal? I know nothing about that. So that's a huge issue, right? Where these bills are going up tremendously high, and this has a lot to do with the sanctions. And then you have the governments talking about the fact that they should not be using firewood because it's going to cause too much CO2 in the atmosphere and damage it even more. Why do you live with your parents? I do not live with my parents, actually. But I think that is the way to go in the future. Big corporations will no longer make billions because of the woke left. Yeah, well, we'll get into that in 1 second. Give your parents a break. Yeah. I live in a totally different state than my parents do. But anyway, we'll get into that all in a second. But Europe is also facing what's going on right now with the protest in, where is it? Norway, Serbia. I don't know exactly where Serbia is at, but Serbia is protesting. I think Finland, Germany, all of them are protesting the whole climate change things as well. And so Europe, and then you have the migration problem. So Europe is foreshadowing what may be coming to the United States. And now the officials over there, especially in Germany, are talking about potential protests and violent riots that will be caused over there by extremists. So I would keep your eyes on that, because this is kind of telling us to what may be coming to us, because we face a lot of the same problems as Europe does. Maybe not at scale, but over time, I think that we'll be feeling that. Let's see. Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate the cowboy hat and the mustache. Let's see here. Parents don't want their grown children living with them. They do. They do, actually. The only reason that they don't is because they've poisoned their children with, Western medicine. They feed them crappy diets. And so they destroy their system. They destroy their children's immune system. They destroy their children's nervous system, which then makes them anxious little brats. And then they turn into adults. And then those adults have so many coping tools that they use. So typically the parents would, because multi-generational homes are the way to go, right? Because what do? You support nursing homes. You think that every kid should send their parent to a nursing home, as opposed to taking care of their parents into old age. Is that all you're posting behind you? Yeah. What are your credentials? I'm here. I'm alive. I'm a human. I have a brain. LOL, no one wants a grown man child. I was moved out by 18. Yeah, so I think that, all right, we'll jump to that one then. The reason parents or children should live in that you should live in the same house as your parents is that way it gives you more wealth and more resources. You live in a multi-generational home. If you look at tribes, if you look at what our ancestors did, our tribal ancestors and our agricultural ancestors had multi-generational homes. And this is how they passed down wisdom. They shared resources. They were much wealthier than we were today because they had community. And community is much more rare than getting a dollar bill. My parents want me to live with them, and I'd gladly stay. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with living with your parents. The only issue when it comes to living with your parents is if you never actually mature, you never get out of your, childish phases. That's the difference, right? So if you're just an immature scumbag who doesn't have a job, who, isn't trying to start your own business, isn't helping out the family in any way, shape, or form, well, then, yeah, I get that. But that's typically not how it was, right? Especially if you had a family farm where, maybe the grandpa and the grandma started it, and then everybody else, around them started helping as well. So that would be totally different. Hey, what's going on?
Hi, so I'm Ronnie. I'm 18 years old, and I want to talk about, should parents have a say in their child's career path? In my opinion, I believe that if the parents, have good intentions for the child, I'm talking about when a child's very, very young, when the child should decide for themselves. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And everybody is their own person. People aren't going to be like their family all the time. People aren't going to be the same person the whole time of their life. And I'm really grateful that my parents are going to be okay with me doing whatever I want to do. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And I have a question. So what exactly is transhumanism?
Transhumanism is the merging of humans with machines.
No way. Is this happening?
Well, they want it to happen.
What do you know about that
topic? Quite a bit, actually. On my YouTube channel, on which is this right here, MOT Media, you can find me interviewing the current president of the Transhumanist Association, the political party. I've interviewed the Mormon Transhumanist founder. I've interviewed the Christian Transhumanist founder as well. So the idea is to extend life forever and to eventually upload one's consciousness into a machine That way you will never die consciously. That is their objective. It will not fail. I mean, it will fail. It's a very, very silly idea, I think. But that's ultimately what they want.
Yeah, I think it's very unnatural for someone to never die. And here's the thing, like, the machine can fail, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I feel like that's a huge waste on resources, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there can be some benefits to it. I could see for sure. However, it will, I think overall, Nietzsche talked about the bifurcation of man, which just basically means the splitting of man between actual humans and subhumans. And I think the transhumanists will fall into the latter category because they won't be human, and you can't upload your consciousness. That's a silly thought. That will never happen. That's a spiritual thing, and that already kind of happens, I would say, in reality as it is.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right, it was nice talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. You too. All right. Hey, how's it going? Going well. Yourself?
Doing well. I'm Joe, but some people see my name as Exmo. I respond to either of those.
Okay.
Just point of history, Exmo refers to my being ex-Mormons, and Exmo TikTok, and Ex-Mormon TikTok, we refer to ourselves as Exmo.
Okay.
I just a few comments here. I mean, more or less touching on the theme of a few things here in your very diverse list. I have to broad list. Medical science is definitely real. I mean, that's because it works, right? I mean, when we see that there are objective outcomes to objective science, and that it actually does accomplish the ends for which the medicine has been invented, we see that it can work, that it does work consistently.
Well, thank you for bringing that point up. Hang on. Let's stay right there because I haven't even touched on this in my life. So thank you for bringing that up. And that's what most people think, right? But actually, there have been many. So there's this issue in science overall, whether it be in medicine, chemistry, biology, physics. There's this thing called the reproducibility crises, where nearly 70 in total between all the realms of science, you have a collective 75 or 66% rather of all studies that can't be reproduced, meaning that they're total nonsense, but they still get published into journals and treated as fact. And so this is a phenomenon that's happening across all scientific industries. But now there's been recent articles coming out specifically against medical science. And so they found that pretty much 70% of all medical science trials are faked, are using no longer valid data. Like this guy, Ian Roberts, professor of etymology at the London School of Hygiene in Tropical Medicine, had his doubts regarding a certain trial, and he found that the data that was used to conclude certain things regarding this type of death that occurs from a head injury was totally based on trials that had never happened. So the professor never existed. The university that the professor claimed to be from never existed. And that's happening all the time in the medical field right now. And then there was also another case for anesthesiology where there were 14% in this journal. 14% of the studies in the journal were false data. 8% of them were categorized as zombie data, which zombie data just means they're no longer valid and they're falsified. And then also, let's see here. So untrustworthy data in this journal itself, and this is for anesthesiology, was 44%. And then the zombie trials, once again, was 26%. And so we look at other countries, Egypt, there was a study conducted testing all of the trials that they had done that were accepted into well-renowned medical journals, and 100% of all of the research out of Egypt was falsified. About 80% from Iran falsified. South Korea, about 70. In China, it was about 40. So yeah, no, there is a huge issue going on in the scientific fields, and this has a lot to do with funding, right? Because they're getting paid. Essentially, they keep their jobs if they can fake the data enough, so that way their research is paid for, and then they can promote their nonsense. But there is a huge issue.
Can I weigh in there? I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to say that for me, what you're suggesting now, it's true that there are a lot of studies that are done, especially when you take the whole world into account. There are a lot of studies that are done that are just favoring towards corporations or towards whoever can pay for the study or what have you, and the findings are skewed, and often they use faulty data. That I definitely have heard of.
And it's like the overwhelming majority, by the way. It's almost 100% nowadays. And I'm not saying that we. And I'm not
saying globally.
Yes, and this is horrible. This is a huge problem.
It is a huge problem. No, I agree with that. But I mean, even then, I think that at best what you can say is that these supposed studies are not using real science. They're not, because they're using fake data or their data is being skewed. So they're not. So science isn't the problem. The problem is that there isn't enough science in the study.
Yeah, nobody's blaming science here. But the quote unquote, that's never been my point. It seems that even people in the comment section seem to get triggered when I question these things because they see science is good. And if you associate science with anything bad, such as them scientists fudging up the numbers for their own benefit, as you saying science is bad. No, science is true. It should be used. However, we're just appealing to science as if it is a gospel when it's not. It should clearly be questioned. We should not accept medical science, physics science, biological science as truth because a scientist is saying it, because now that we know that so much of the data is falsified, almost 70% in every field is almost falsified in today's world, right? It may have not been that way in the 1800s. It may have not been that way in the early 1900s. But as of today, they should all be questioned and looked at with extreme skepticism because they're built on a house of cards, and they seem to be falling apart right now.
Okay, I mean, I'm all for saying we should scrutinize all scientific claims and ask questions about what methodology is used for the science, what is the credibility of the scientists conducting it, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's always been the case with science.
It hasn't, though. It hasn't. That's what I'm saying. It has not been. It has not been. For the past 2 decades. For the past 2-3 decades, it has not been what you're saying it is. Ideally, we want it to be that, right? We do. Right. I think we agree more. I don't even think we disagree at all. So, there's no need to try to defend it because guess what, dude? I know that it's financial interests that are corrupting it. I would also go as far as saying that it's spiritual interests that are corrupting it, but we can at least agree on that corporations, nonprofits are funding these places and they're getting money from it. And these scientists are afraid of losing their jobs if their theories are proven wrong. And so they'll falsify them to get paid. I get it. Money corrupts, man. The science field is extremely corrupt.
I mean, we can agree on moneyed interests being part of the problem, but moneyed interests are the problem in politics, it's a problem in academia, it's a problem in media, etc. But I don't know about what spiritual intentions are, if that's what I don't know, is that the term you used? I don't know what those are. But spiritual interests, that's right. But moneyed interests, we can definitely agree to. But I mean, in that situation, I think what we're agreeing is that when medical science uses real science, it's valid, and when it's not, then it should be scrutinized to see if that it's not.
Yeah, and most of it is not valid today, factually.
I mean,
most of it is not.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying of the published data that's published out there, studies.
Yes,
most of it,
and that's where you would, and that's where people like you and me, who may want to, dive into some of these medical studies to get a better feel of what's going on, whether it be health or whatever your interests are, diet, health, nutrition, etc. You're going to go to these journals as a source of authority, but they're losing their credibility because damn near 70% of them are producing fake trials that they're using as data. So who do you trust? This is the hard thing. We're losing our trust in institutions, and it's because they're corrupted. It doesn't mean that science isn't real. It doesn't mean that science isn't real. It doesn't mean that medicine isn't real or good. Those are not my claims. My claims are they're extremely corrupted globally in the world today, especially in the West. So we should not take their advice. We should not just listen to them because they have a credential saying, I'm a scientist, because they could be using, based on this information, falsified data to justify their beliefs. And they may not even know it.
But I mean, if you take, for example, the National Institutes of Health, the National Institutes of Health are held up by the academic world as the gold standard in qualifying what qualifies as medical science and medical data throughout the world, because their standards are so much higher.
Dude, come on. Don't use this. Come on, let's not use cognitive dissonance here, man. The academics are the ones that are fucking with the data. The academics are the ones paid to fuck the data. That's what we're talking about right now, and we already agreed.
That sounds like paranoia to me.
It's not. How the hell is this paranoia? No, dude. How do you lock? How do you lack logical thinking in this instance? I literally already told you that it is not all academia. I already told you it is not science that it's at fault. We agree on this. We agree that it's financial interest. And so financial interest are messing with the academic studies, which are then destroying the credibility of these academics, which we should be able to trust because they should be the experts. But what we're finding per the data is that they're lying to get money. And now you're saying that the National Institute of Health is held up by the liars, the academics who are lying to get money.
Right. I'm suggesting, okay, so I'm getting to a larger point on that point. I had only said that they are held up by the academics as being the gold standard because they scrutinize the methodology of scientists who make claims, and they ensure they always guarantee that the science is reproducible.
They don't.
Making sure
they
that
don't.
It's peer-reviewed.
They don't. This is provable. It's called the.
I'm not talking about everybody.
No, they don't, dude. Overall, generally speaking, over 66% of all scientific research, this goes for physics, biology, chemistry, psychology, sociology, biomedicine, 66% of them in today's world are not reproduced. They are not reproduced, and they're published. And they're published.
You're hearing me.
I do.
In the NIH, the National Institutes of Health.
Yes, and the NIH is using these same publications. The NIH is using the same fake data. That's what I'm saying.
No.
They can't just be.
I'm saying,
if they found that okay, 70% of this is nonsense because they're paid for it, right? So if the NHS found that, then why doesn't everybody know about this issue?
The NHS is a British or a Canadian organization. I'm talking about the American organization, National Institutes of Health.
Yeah, why are they not talking about this issue if they knew how to systematically decipher which one was fake and which one wasn't? Because of only 30% or 20% of the information in these journals and these academics were valid.
Okay. If I can answer you, the National Institutes of Health is a government organization that runs the grants from the government for studies done in peer-reviewed science. So their job is to make sure to get the moneyed interests as much as possible isolated from the data, and to show that the methodology for the data is good enough for that data to be presented to, for example, the Food and Drug Administration, to make sure that the drugs and equipment, et cetera, that are used are considered safe, to a point where most of the medical world outside the United States thinks that we over-scrutinize medical data because we don't take these studies into account. You take like hydroxychloroquine, right? Hydroxychloroquine, most of the world outside the United States was convinced would cure coronavirus because of the data that was published about it in Egypt, in France, I think, and in Russia or something. And they said, if it might work, and let's try it. But of course, they went out and the NIH were the ones who came out and pointed out none of this data can be verified. None of it is peer reviewed.
Why are they not?
And there's methodology problems with the way that it was collected. And people said, well, let's just give it to people. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? And the answer is it's an immunosuppressant. We can make them susceptible to other infections. And so it is a problem. Not to mention the fact that then hydroxychloroquine, which some people use for the treatment of things like rheumatoid arthritis and malaria and things like this, then suddenly wasn't available for people who needed it because people were mass purchasing it for coronavirus, which they then were able to show it had not only zero benefits for treating coronavirus, but it also was actually deleterious to the well-being of people who were used in the studies.
Yeah, well, that doesn't disprove anything I've been stating. All I'm saying is that overall, be very dubious of scientific facts because they are proven very quickly that they could be falsified. That's all. The overwhelming majority, there are multiple scientists, there are multiple people coming out in academia saying, yo, guys, this is a huge problem, and nobody's talking about it.
I can agree to saying scientists have found or scientists discovered is an argument that is lazy and even perhaps dangerous. But I mean, all that says to me is that we ought to be having conversations where we say, let's talk about the methodology of scientific research into certain topics. Who was there a control group? Was it peer reviewed? What are the credentials of the scientists involved, etc.
Yeah, and they're just finding huge inconsistencies. They're finding professors who weren't even alive, colleges that don't even exist. It's interesting.
Right, but otherwise there are some who are actually doing good science, and it works.
Yeah, we never disagreed on that. Never once. I think the biggest problem here is that over 70% of medical science trials in the past decade or so, 70% of them you can't trust. 70%. That's a much bigger problem. I think it's. I get it because there's going to be some people who are too binary of thinkers who are going to say, well, you're saying that's bad, so therefore all of science is bad. Yeah, well, that's a very illogical way of thinking. That lacks critical thinking. Nobody's making that claim. But what we should be talking about is the fact that over 70%, in some cases, 100% of the medical science trials are fake. They're not true. So now we have to question where you're not. Like I think it's just, as far as we go, like sources, we can talk about sources, but as far as like the general source, the general like if you're talking to the masses about sources, you can literally just throw out Harvard said this and they'll listen to you. But it could be the Harvard professor who falsified the data as well. So really, we're just losing credibility in academia. We're losing credibility in science, and this is because of financial corruption. I think it has to do also with spiritual corruption, and this is a bigger problem than trying to defend science. I think that we should be we should scrutinize as people science even more because of all of the false data that's coming out of it. Provably, it's a crisis. It's called the reproducibility crisis. I did a whole live stream about it, breaking it down.
I totally just got through with you explaining to me that you weren't being critical of science in general.
So once again, we should be critical. Nobody's questioning science methodology. The scientific method works. Nobody's questioning that. All right, nobody's questioning that. So anytime you talk about this with people, they seem to get triggered that, oh, you don't believe in science. No, I don't have to believe in science because I know science works. There is no belief in science. I don't need to believe in science. The scientific method it exists without belief. It is what it is. But
Right.
the scientific field is filled with corruption. Therefore, you should be skeptical of those that are scientists in the scientific field, not the methodology. Those two things are very distinct. Do scientists do the scientific method? Yes. But do scientists always do the scientific method? No. Therefore, be skeptical of the scientist, not the scientific method. That's never been my argument this whole time. And I'm just saying that we should really, really focus on that, because we are going to get really, really screwed in the future by not. And we already have. I'm sure there's a lot of people. I mean, the number, like, and I think it's in the top 10 causes of death in the United States is malpractice. So this is already trickling out to real people's life. But anyway, what's another point that you wanted to talk about? Another topic.
I mean, as far as like on the topic of parents shouldn't have input on their children's careers, and at the same time, this idea about transhumanism. I think I actually met the person you talk about that was the head of the Mormon Transhumanist Society. I remember having a conversation with someone who claimed to be that person.
Lincoln
I don't
Cannon?
remember his name, their name. But anyway, it was an interesting conversation to be sure. I think that these are both. I think it's bad for parents to weigh in on their kids' careers, and I think that it's bad for people to seek immortality either by technology or by religious means, or claiming that they can achieve immortality through religious means or what have you, because part of the natural course of the improvement of human beings is that as human beings age and their minds become less flexible, their minds become less capable, they become less relevant in society, and then eventually they die. And it's a great instigator for innovation that most of the work on the side of innovation and most of the exploration in new ideas is explored by the young, people who are optimistic, people who have energy, and people who have minds that are capable of tackling big and complex ideas without being burdened by the weight of demoralization from experience. And so I think that it's smart for parents to look and say, look, we don't know what the world is going to look like for these kids. If they want help, then give them help. But if they don't want help, then let them make their own choices. Let them make choices that make sense for them.
Do you have children?
I do.
Nice. How old are you?
Yeah. I'm 42.
Okay. Yeah, I have 3 kids.
This month.
Nice. I have 3 kids. I'm 26.
Oh man, you are young for 3 kids.
Yeah, that's the way it should be, man. Should have kids young. That way you can see your great grandkids. But
I don't know about that. I don't know that I want to live that long.
Why not?
Just because life is, I mean, primarily suffering, and I don't know that there's any reason to want more.
Is it suffering? Does seeing your child make you feel suffer or make you feel pain?
No, I love my children. Well, I mean, yes, my children make me suffer, but I love them anyways. Of course, children are one of the few things in life that make suffering meaningful. And so, so we love them.
So you're a nihilist.
Perhaps even to an irrational degree. But that's a good thing for making sure that they survive.
Yeah. So you have more of a.
Said that one of the greatest scams humanity ever pulled on itself is that we name our children, because once you name them, it makes it so much more difficult to get rid of them.
I think that's a very evil way of thinking. Whoever said that was a disgusting human being.
That was me.
Yeah, it's very disgusting. Yeah, I mean, why would you want to not get rid of your child? That's why would you want to get rid of your child? No, why would you want to get rid of your child? Why would you?
I'm saying you love your children, you fall in love with your children, and you care about them, but then they will make you miserable throughout the course of your life from time to time. Of course, generally they make you happy. Spending time with them.
I don't know. My children have never made me miserable, and I have twins. They're 2 years old. And I have one that's on the way. They never made me miserable. Have they made me miss some sleep?
You have teenagers.
Yeah, they probably won't make me miserable either. It seems like we have a totally different philosophy of life. I don't know how children can make you feel miserable. I don't at all. Unless you raise them wrong and then they turn out to be hell on earth. But anyway, yeah, so my whole point with bringing this up is because you said that the parents aren't going to know what's coming down the pipeline for their child, what future they'll live in. I tend to disagree because as the parents, we have more foresight than our child. And if we're going to be intelligent and well-informed, we can then recognize certain patterns that will be developing throughout that child's life. And then we can apply, and then we can see what fields will be in there, what will be out in the world for them to go into. And then also you're going to have a better understanding of your child's skills and their talents maybe than they do, because they may be blinded by their talents. They may be blind to their talents. They may not have enough self-confidence or whatever it may be to see those things. So the parent is wiser, typically more intelligent, and has more foresight. So just because they can't predict the future, when the child can't predict the future either. And who's really concerned about the child's future? The parent is. The child isn't really concerned about their future until, well, they're old enough to then be concerned about it. Some children are, don't get me wrong, but most children aren't. And so I do think it's the parent's responsibility to pick what career they're going to go into and influence it.
I mean, I'm not suggesting. I wouldn't suggest that parents are more intelligent than their children after a certain age. Once you get to the point where you have to hand your devices to your children and say, "Baby, make this work for daddy."
That doesn't mean they're more intelligent than you. That's totally different than That doesn't mean they're more intelligent than you because they're more technologically savvy.
I would argue it probably is actually, or at least that they're developing faster. Their brains are developing faster than ours. But even more than that, what I was speaking to was that we become demoralized as we age, and as we age, we begin to poo-poo different career fields and things like this. I mean, people in my generation, for example, may poo-poo gender studies, for example, and say, "Oh, that's like going into political science. Don't go into that. There's no money in it. It's just for yuppies. It's blah, 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 blah," because we have the burden of experience on that. Whereas for all we know, gender studies may be the most lucrative field in 20 years.
No, it won't.
I'm telling you, we don't know.
No, we do know it. We do know it. Anybody that's logical and spiritual can come to the conclusion that gender studies will not be around for much longer. Maybe a generation. Maybe.
I think that's a pretty broad prediction to make. Without, I'm not really sure what the difference is between spiritual people and non-spiritual people, but I don't know that it makes us it makes anybody more capable to predict the future.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can then see patterns of behavior that you wouldn't see otherwise, and that you wouldn't identify as bad had you not had spiritual guidance. So yeah, spirituality has a lot to do with it.
People, you're talking about people who talk to the dead, or to people who talk to the unseen forces or hear voices?
No, I mean, they could be involved in that. I mean, at least they have a spiritual understanding of the world. But I'm not specifically talking about them. I would say religiously spiritual people. I think Muslims have a good worldview. I think Jewish people have a good worldview for the most part. Christians, I am a Christian, so I would say that we have the best worldview, but they all offer truth in them, and they all illustrate patterns of behavior that will cause a society to crumble. And those kind of studies are right in line with making societies crumble.
Yeah, having been most of my adult life an atheist, and having spent all of my childhood and a significant portion of my young life in a cult, I would have to push back on that and say that the ones who are really looking for truth are people who don't look for God or look for spiritual guidance at all, because those are the people who are looking at the world as it is, rather than looking into confirmation bias to try and find meaning and then labeling that as truth. But I don't think I'll convince you of that.
And I don't think I'll convince you otherwise. I mean, I can literally make a similar argument back at you. So, it's going to be futile.
Yeah. Well, Well, it's been a good conversation, and I'm glad that I cleared that up, and I was able to understand a little better where you were coming from.
Yep, right on, man. Have a good one.
Take it easy, man.
All right. So let's see here. I think we've pretty much covered everything except for big corporations. I thought he was a nihilist. He is definitely nihilistic. Children are not miserable. They do not make you miserable. Not at all. Not at all. Can they test you because they're learning things? Yes. But to say that your child makes you miserable, I don't know. I don't know what kind of person can say that. I don't. Like, they definitely don't. They make your world a lot better. Children are the best investment you'll make in your life. They are the future. And, that has a lot to do with his atheistic perspective. My kids absolutely love life, and they give thanks to God every day. Right on, Aaron. My children love life too. How do you see a small child and think, wow, you make me miserable? Or even a teenager. How do you say, wow, you make me miserable? That's insane to me. That's very insane to me. And that kind of thinking is paving the way right now, but it won't be for much longer. It's just insane. So the only thing that I have not covered in here is the ESG will break corporations. So big corporations will fail due to being woke left wingers. So for those of you that don't know, there's this thing called ESG, government loans, and basically they're giving loans to corporations to push, socially aware and environmentally aware agendas within the companies. And so between 2014 and 2018, about 25% of the total market assets, which these corporations were receiving ESG loans, were, receiving just these loans. And then it's predicted by 2024, 50% of them will be receiving ESG loans. And so what's happening is you have corporations like Disney, Netflix, losing tons of money because of their woke agenda. And the reason they don't care that they're losing money is because they're getting these loans. They're getting these ESG loans. And these ESG loans are, essentially balancing out their losses from sale revenue. But those loans have to be repaid, and those loans will run out someday. And when you have decreased your sales revenue by so much, there's only one option left: failure. So we're all such amazing creations. It's hard to understand nihilism, and it's heartbreaking. I understand nihilism. I was a bit of a nihilist in my younger years. I think that nihilism is very, very much, understand. Like, I understand how people get there. I do, because it can appear, especially if you have the absence of God in your life, that life is meaningless and you can just create your own meaning. Right? And that you really have nothing to lose, right? Because when you die, you die. There's nothing else after it. So what does it matter? So live your best life. Don't worry about the future. Don't worry about, what's happening tomorrow. Just live right now. Like, have fun and do the best you can right now. And, there's no meaning. So not even necessarily do the best you can. What brought you back? So, Christianity overall, religion overall, because I was going through the nihilism phase as I was exploring religion, mostly Christianity, and I got really deep into Nietzsche's books. I read, The Genealogy of Morality, Good and Evil, Antichrist, and Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Trying to think if I read any other of his books. Not that off the top of my hand I can think of. And so they made a lot of sense to me. And I thought the idea of nihilism wasn't so bad because also you have to consider like the historical view as well, right? There's always gods, there's always religions that build up societies and civilizations. And so what we see when Nietzsche said God is dead, it was like the zeitgeist of that day. That's the way I took it. That was like governing the society and how they, what was acceptable, not acceptable. Well, that died. And so something new came about. So it was like almost this, I thought it was very logical that, okay, so like with the death of society is the death of religion. And then we see like Christianity seems to be dying right now, right? And so like, you see the death of religion, the death of society, and then a new society forms and some type of new religion forms, or a rekindling of an old religion in a different way forms. So, that process of like, all right, so there is no meaning in life. And therefore you can make your own meaning, which can then make your life even more meaningful because you're making it. And there's going to be constant change. So it just seemed to be logical with the world. But then you find out that it actually isn't very logical because there is only one God, and he's here always. He's never changed. He's true. And that you don't create your meaning. He creates the meaning for the world. So is nihilism like a bitter cynic, or is it intellectual framework, or some of both? I don't know that I would call it cynical. Maybe, but it's more of an intellectual framework. It's like a worldview. I guess maybe you can say a little bit of both, but it's definitely a worldview. It changes the way that you perceive the world for sure. To the point where you can say your children make you miserable. So, yeah, but that's pretty much all that I had to cover today, guys. It was a good live stream. Thank you all for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe. Follow us on MOT Media on YouTube. Everybody on TikTok, everybody on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Be sure to follow us on TikTok at MOT News, MOT Today, MOT Sports, MOT Media, all that good stuff. And so much love. Peace.